Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this continued coverage of the Israeli airstrikes on Gaza and the Israeli violence throughout the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and now extending to target Palestinian Arab communities inside Israel itself, and of course, the Palestinian resistance to this campaign, this Israeli campaign of violence and provocations that is taking place in many parts of Palestine, and for the first time, really extending into a whole new territories that have not been included in previous wars with Israel. The fact that Palestinian cities or the Arab population communities of these cities within Israel itself, such as al-Fahim, Al-Lud, Al-Ramla, even in places like Tel Aviv and such, there's mass protests and acts of violence, organized acts of violence carried out by the Israeli extremists and the Israeli police and army. The latest that we are getting from Israel right now is that the Israeli army has, or rather, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered the army to enter into Israeli cities to help in the suppression of Palestinians in those cities, especially in Al-Lud and al-Fahim and elsewhere. And what we have learned from Israeli sources is that Benny Gantz, the defense minister of Israel, has refused to obey Netanyahu's orders. This is an entirely new discourse on this issue. We haven't really seen anything like this in the past. What we also haven't seen is this display of unity among Palestinians in many years. I would say that the latest of such displays of unity go back to the first Palestinian uprising, the Intifada of 1987, when Palestinians throughout Palestine rose in unison in protest of the Israeli occupation, Israeli racism, apartheid, and discrimination. And there's been many years in which the discussion have really centered around the issue of Palestinian division, Palestinian disunity, and so forth. Well, this is the Palestinian people response to anyone who has doubted the unity of the Palestinian people. Factionalist politics, Hamas, Fatah, and everybody else have their own agendas, but the Palestinian people were and remain united in their millions, Muslims and Christians all across Palestine, not just the occupied territories along with East Jerusalem, but also within historic Palestine 1948. They are very much united in their unity and in their determination to win this war of liberation, to win their freedom against these ongoing atrocities. I'm going to bring with me Romana Rubeo, my co-host and the managing editor of the Palestine Chronicle, just to get some quick updates from the latest from our blog on the Palestine Chronicle. I'm also joined by our correspondent in the Gaza Strip. First of all, let's welcome Romana quickly. Hello, Romana. Thank you for joining us. I'm also here receiving the latest updates from our correspondent in Gaza. Very quickly, I think before we read the updates from our correspondent in Gaza, we might have the speech by the spokesperson of the resistance in Gaza, Abu Ubaidah, was scheduled to deliver a speech. Um, but more on this later. I am going to bring you the couple of live updates, one from Al Mayadeen, a news channel in Lebanon, and the other from Al Jazeera. We are going to be moving back and forth there between both of them. Let's bring you Al Mayadeen first, if I can successfully share my screen here. Al Mayadeen has been reporting an extensive coverage as well about the situation, the escalating situation in various parts of Palestine. Again, this is really unprecedented. And what is so unprecedented about all of this? I mean, many elements of what's going on today is quite new. But what is so interesting about all of this is that historically, Israel tends to creates conflicts and manage the conflicts in any way that is consistent with whatever political objectives they have in mind. What happened this time around is that Netanyahu was managing a conflict successfully from his point of view in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in Jerusalem, humiliating few Palestinian families, ethnically cleansing them from their homes in the old city, in order for him to garner the support of few organizations and Knesset members from the fascist, ultra-nationalist right wings in Israel, in order for him to remain in power. But what has happened instead is that the furious response from the Palestinian resistance in Gaza has jumbled up the calculations entirely, forcing him to deal with a conflict that he did not anticipate would reach this degree. Now he is trying to respond. He's trying to deal with this situation, but as he's trying to put out the fire in Gaza, a new fire starts in Al-Lud, a new fire starts in Al-Fahim, a new fire starts in Nablus, and so forth, because the Palestinian people, as we said, are united in their resistance. And it's for the first time in many years, it is actually Netanyahu who is scrambling to deal with the fallout of the crisis that he has instigated. Now, to you, Romana, we are seeing images from Sheikh Jarrah in Al-Quds, aired through Al Mayadeen satellite channel in Lebanon. We thank all of our colleagues in Arab and international media who are doing a good job in trying to place proper focus on this issue. And we urge those who have, insist on seeing things from an Israeli point of view to, for once, trying to imagine this narrative from the viewpoint of the Palestinian victim. To you, Romana.
Yes, Ramzy, we are watching the scenes from Sheikh Jarrah because the tension is still high in this East Jerusalem neighborhood, where it seems that the two twin brothers that were a little bit the symbol of this struggle, because Muna al-Kurd was the Palestinian girl who was in the video with the Jewish settlers with the American accent, who was trying to steal her house in Sheikh Jarrah. She shared the video on all social media. She became a little bit the symbol of this struggle. And it seems even Al Jazeera is reporting that she and her twin brothers were arrested. And
Romana, if we can locate that video, I've seen it earlier. I know we have it in the live blog. If we can share our screen with our viewers right now and show them the video of Muna's arrest, that would be good. Can we do that?
course.
And while you are locating this video, just a quick reminder to our readers: if you go to PalestineChronicle.com, you will be able to find the latest, sometimes minutely updates of the latest situation from Gaza. And our correspondent in Gaza, Fawzi Mahmoud, is doing his very best to send us the latest minute-to-minute happening. The latest I received, or we received from Fawzi, is that a major street between the Saraya roundabout and the Abu Khadra compound in Gaza City has been bombed repeatedly through a series of Israeli strikes. The road, he says, is but a large hole. Another update is that the National Islamic Bank, which is located on Salahuddin Street in Al Bureij refugee camp in central Gaza, has been hit by an Israeli strike. He also reported that a volley of 8 large Israeli missiles have landed west of Gaza City just 10 or so minutes ago. We are not yet aware of the nature of the casualties in that area. We will keep you updated as soon as we hear from our correspondent or from the Palestinian health ministry. Earlier, there was some news that the headquarters of the Palestinian Ministry of Finance was hit. We are yet to confirm this. We know that Israeli unmanned drones have been circulating in that area for quite some time. We cannot confirm the news that the Ministry of Finance has been hit, but again, we'll keep you updated. We also just received the latest update that some Palestinian targets in the northern Gaza Strip have been struck repeatedly through a series of airstrikes, Israeli airstrikes, just minutes ago. And finally, just this minute, a new Israeli strike targeting several schools in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza. Back to you, Romana.
Yes, Ramzy, the video, of course, is uploading, so we have to wait a little bit, but we have seen, we can see the images. So basically now, Ramzy, all of Gaza has been targeted, northern, central, and eastern Gaza, and we know that the Israeli army deployed several men and several tanks along the fence separating Besieged Gaza from Israel. This morning, our correspondent from the Gaza Strip, Wafa Al-Udaini, in an interview with the Italian radio, also told us that every target, basically every moving target, was a target for Israel, and they were shooting even from these tanks to, for example, to Palestinian farmers who were going and cultivate their land. The situation is particularly explosive in the rest of Palestine. So we have Gaza, we have the West Bank, but as we said, even Palestine 1948, now Israel is in a situation which is a little bit different than, you know, the scenes that we are used to. We know that there was a tense situation with a high rate of criminality there. We knew that there were also political issues. We saw that before the Israeli elections. We didn't imagine that the situation was so tense. But as we said repeatedly, the Israeli apartheid does not only apply to the occupied territories, to Gaza and to the West Bank, but even to the territory that is now currently, that is Israel. So we have basically Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, according to Israeli media, according to Haaretz, and even confirmed by Al Jazeera, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wanted the Israeli army to storm the major cities in Israel, but his defense minister Benny Gantz refused.
And information are still somewhat we haven't really heard much details aside from that particular statement. I mean, this is if there is one thing that Israelis are good at, that despite of their intense political polarization, when it comes to these sort of conflicts, they always, at least the top political echelons in Israeli society, always try to speak in one voice. Hearing this kind of language is really quite unprecedented. The prime minister calls for the army to be deployed, and the prime minister and the defense minister says no. Now, these scenes that we are watching also live, this time we are switching to Al Jazeera, is of Israeli Jewish extremists attacking Palestinian neighborhood in the old city of Haifa. So this is inside today's Israel. This is in historic Palestine, what we call Palestine 48, today's Israel. We are seeing Jewish extremists attacking Palestinian properties, setting fire on cars, destroying cars, and attacking homes in the city of Haifa. Another breaking news, this time coming from Al Jazeera itself. Biden says Israel has the right to defend itself when it's being attacked with thousands of Palestinian rockets. So once more, the American administration provides a blank check of support to Israel, as it has always done in the past. But of course, the Palestinians and their supporters are really hardly surprised by all of this. As far as they are concerned, the change will not come from Washington itself. The change will come from the Palestinian people and their supporters worldwide. Romana?
We have the images of the arrest of Al-Kurd brothers. So, Ramzy, I can send...
So, yes, let's go ahead and upload the images.
Of course.
ضربني
اما تعرفش بتاخد في الارض خلاص خليك برا خلاص عن رب الله تبعك.
So basically they were escorted out of the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah.
And of course, the those who have been following our updates, I'm going to take us back to Sheikh Jarrah quickly here.
In the meantime,
this is from Al Mayadeen, live coverage of the situation in the Sheikh Jarrah. As we can tell by now, the situation is the degree of violence, the intensity of the violence is growing exponentially, not just in Sheikh Jarrah and Jerusalem and Gaza, but throughout the occupied territories and also the Palestinian communities inside Israel as well. Romana?
Yes, we have more numbers from the Palestinian Health Ministry. Gaza death toll reaches 65 Palestinians, including 16 children and 5 women. At least 365 Palestinians have been wounded so far, including 86 children and 39 women. So these are the latest number communicated and confirmed by the Palestinian Health Ministry. Also, violence between Palestinian citizens and Israeli Jews in the Palestine 1948 is still very high, as we said. In Tel Aviv, in several towns like Al-Lud, and there are Israeli nationalists are storming this town, basically trying to push Arab residents out and attacking Palestinian properties. And there were videos of, for example, Palestinian restaurants that were set on fire. So the violence is extreme at this point. And even if the Israeli army did not intervene, we know that there are these Israeli extremists, Ramzy, that are somehow an armed wing of the decisions taken by Israeli authorities, even if it's not official, but basically they act according to a scheme. Do you think so?
Absolutely. Of course, none of this is random. The Jewish extremists act as if they are a paramilitia or kind of like another army that is being utilized by Benjamin Netanyahu to achieve his political ends, and his ultimate political end at this point is to remain in power as long as possible. I'm going to take you quickly to our live blog at the Palestine Chronicle. Just to let you know, number one, we are keeping up with the story. We are, as you can see, updated here by the minute. We provide you with latest footage, photos, and lines of breaking news as they happen, coming from our 2 correspondents in Gaza, and also from various news agencies, including Al Jazeera, Al Mayadeen, and Palestinian-owned sources as well. This is a scene of a brutal assault on Palestinians by extremist Israeli settlers in Jaffa. Let's watch. Okay, this is I apologize for the brutality of this scene and how graphic it is, but sometimes just this painful truth has to be seen, has to be heard, has to be read, has to be viewed by millions of people in order for them to understand what Palestinians are going through.
We have Ramzy also.
Yes, there is another scene I would like to show here, and that is of extremist Jewish settlers caught on camera attacking Palestinian-owned shops in Jaffa. I'm not even sure if caught on camera is the right term here, as if they really don't care whether they are caught on camera or not caught on any camera. You know, this is the everyday reality in Palestine. This is the kind of extremism that Palestinians have to deal with. I mean, when we say Jewish extremists, this is what we are dealing with. This is the kind of violence, this is kind of brutality that is happening in Palestine. And these are the men behind it. This is the army of Benjamin Netanyahu, through which he is able to remain in power for as long as possible. Yes, Romana.
Yes, I wanted to bring to your attention one of the comments here. It says, in solidarity, UK politicians have still given out the official line about Israel versus Hamas, but there is a growing groundswell of support from the ordinary people. I can testify that this is the case all over Europe because, for example, Italian foreign minister today said, of course, he called on all parties to de-escalate, and all the cliche that we are used to hear. But we know, and I'm gonna upload some pictures now, that already there are the first protests, despite the very strict COVID-19 restrictions in Italy in support of the Palestinian people. Today it was in Genova. There will be several protests. And I'm gonna upload some pictures that we reported on the Palestine Chronicle blog today from South Africa, from Kenya.
Right, and we need to add the Kenya photos that arrived
Yes.
from our affiliates in Kenya just an hour or
They
so
are on
ago.
my blog already.
This is the scene in Cape Town, South Africa. A pro-Palestinian march in Cape Town, South Africa, in solidarity with the Palestinian people, happening on Wednesday, May 12. And the credits of the photos. These are thousands of people marching in Cape Town in solidarity with the Palestinian people.
There were also a massive protest in Jordan. The Jordan people took to the streets to express their solidarity for the Palestinian people. But as regarding the official declarations, there is an interesting declaration statement by the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Vershinin, because he called on Israel to immediately stop all settlement activities in the Palestinian territories. He didn't call on both parties to de-escalate. It seems that he put the blame on Israel more. And he also added that Moscow called for the status quo of Jerusalem's sacred sites to be respected. This is maybe the strongest statement so far. The other statements are all very cautious and calling on both parties to de-escalate. Regarding the UN security...
Just quickly, Romana, I'm just going to take us back to Gaza. This is the screen of Al Mayadeen news network, news channel in Lebanon, showing this scene in Gaza, most likely in anticipation of an upcoming attack on the besieged Gaza Strip. When we say besieged Gaza Strip, what we are talking about is that the Gaza Strip, this small and extremely populated place, an impoverished place, has been living under a hermetic Israeli siege for 15 years now, where people are not allowed to leave or to come back. There's very little food coming in, and of course, lack of medicine, polluted water, and lack of electricity. So Gaza has been going through its own particular degree of extreme suffering for many years. And this is why the ferocity of the resistance in that place. Some people are engaging in these silly talks about, judging the Palestinians for resisting this way or that way. If you understand the degree of their suffering and humiliation and want and poverty and complete isolation, you will understand why this ferocity of their resistance. They're fed up. They want to break free from this the world's largest open air prison. That's the reality of it. Now we are back in Sheikh Jarrah. I interrupted you, Romana. You can go ahead.
Yes, I was reporting about the UN Security Council because it's the second emergency meeting that was called for the situation in Jerusalem and in Palestine. But for the second time in a row, basically there were no joint statements on their part. It seems that it was due to the opposition from the United States, of course. The United States didn't want to release a joint statement after the UN security meeting. What do you think, Ramzy? Like, the United Nations seems really devoid of any of their power, of their strength. What is happening from that point of view? The World War II status quo seems completely shattered.
I'm not really sure if the United Nations, Romana, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm not really sure if we can actually affiliate the word power with the United Nations in any way. Not now, not ever before. I mean, we know that the United Nations have been used really just as an either it's just an organization that just exists there to kind of to convey a sense of international unity on various issues that seems to be constantly in line with American foreign policy. We've seen this in Iraq, we've seen it in Afghanistan, and in Libya, and in many other conflicts. So we really, we're not expecting great deal from the United Nations, but what we are expecting, and just before I continue, don't forget that in 2017, Richard Falk and others came up with this report through the United Nations in which they concluded that Israel is an apartheid state. And what was the response? What was the response from the United Nations? Is the Secretary General of the UN suppressed and buried that report so as not to upset the American-Israeli sensibilities. Now, we know, thankfully, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, and other organizations are now essentially saying the same thing, that Israel is an apartheid state. But the UN didn't even have the power, did not have the resolve to issue a statement just calling things the way they are. Imagine then taking action. What are the chances of the UN being able to force any kind of action or any kind of accountability on the Israeli regime? So we shouldn't be expecting that anytime soon. I think what is really interesting here is the American position. Yesterday, Antony Blinken, for example, spoke to his Israeli counterparts, and he conveyed to them American support, this and that, but he also said that this needs to end, and it needs to end immediately. Some people kind of understood this to be a different American position, especially if compared to that of the blind and conditional support offered by previous administrations, not just the Trump administration, but also the Obama administration. I mean, you remember, Romana, in 2014, Israel was running out of munition in their war against Gaza, a war that killed over 2,300, 2,400 people and wounded nearly 15,000. They were running out of munition, and President Obama made sure that Israel's supplies of munition does not run dry, and he supplied Israel and with all the military munition and equipments that they needed in order for them to sustain that war. And indeed, they succeeded in sustaining that war for 51 days. Now, the Biden administration, there was a little bit of hope that they are going to be slightly different than the previous administrations. But just looking at statements, I know that sometimes it's the nuances that we need to read into, especially we're not really, the standards are pretty low when it comes to the US administration's record on Palestine and Israel. But keeping that in mind, we can't claim that there has been a significant change in the American position so far. Nuances aside, essentially, it's the same position. And until that position fundamentally change and view Israel and condemn the Israeli occupation and condemn the Israeli military strikes on Gaza and all of that, until that position develops to that extent, we can't really talk about any fundamental change in the American position on Palestine. We are back to Al Jazeera and back to the live footage coming from Gaza, Romana.
Yes. I'm sorry,
These
Ramzy.
are these are scenes coming from a Gaza hospital um, of dead and wounded Palestinians, the wounded being rushed into the emergency room. Also, another piece of breaking news, a police station in the Beit Hanun area, along with a residential home east of Gaza and a position in the Tell el-Hawa area in south of Gaza, have been bombarded just now. This is just breaking news. We do not know if anybody was at the home or at the police station at the time, but from the rising number of casualties on the Palestinian side, we can imagine that most likely there will be casualties here as well. So you have three screens here. You have one of Gaza on the right, where you would see the Israeli missiles lighting the sky once in a while, falling on Palestinian residential neighborhoods, buildings, or as it was the case yesterday, Palestinian residential towers, like the Hanadi residential tower of 12 or 13 stories and many flats that was completely leveled to the ground in this scene, this really absurd, tragic scene of
And today,
demolition.
another tower, Ramzy, the Shuruk Tower today,
And the
which
Shuruk Tower as well, that was
off.
demolished today. And back, of course, the situation in Haifa continues to deteriorate with the extremist Jewish protesters attacking Palestinian properties and Palestinian cars in the old city of Haifa. And as you can tell, that there is really not a great deal of police presence. I mean, the Netanyahu wants to deploy the army to suppress Palestinians, but when Jewish extremists are running amok here in Haifa, you don't see neither an army nor even few police officers trying to push them back. We do not know what is happening in Ramallah, the central screen here is this of Ramallah. We do not really know exactly what is happening there, but we will update you on the situation there as soon as we get some information. Our correspondents in Gaza, of course, their reporting to us is controlled by the situation when it comes to electricity, and electricity outages for years really in Gaza have been extreme, to the point that at times you could have several days without an hour of electricity. So they try to supply us with news, with lines, with images, photos, videos, pictures, as soon as they are able to access their devices, and as soon as the electricity is back. Also, it seems that the situation is escalating in the town of Biri, near Ramallah in the West Bank. We see this is the right screen, the right bottom screen here, where you see ambulances, large number of Palestinians gathering here, ambulances in and out. We do not know exactly what's happening, and we will keep you updated. We know that the Israeli military has said that they have no intentions of stopping this their military operations in Gaza anytime soon, and then they say, quote, "We are ready to move forward for months at a time." So they are at least allegedly try to convey a picture of preparedness, that they are ready to do this for a long period of time. This scene in front of you, this is a scene from the West Bank, I believe, an Israeli Israeli military is moving in and is met by Palestinian protesters throwing rockets at this Israeli military vehicle. This is coming to you from Al Jazeera Arabic, and yes, indeed, it is in the city of Ramallah in the West Bank. This is the seat of the Palestinian Authority.
Regarding
Yeah.
the Palestinian Authority, after days and days of silence, basically, because there were broken statements here and there, the Palestinian official news agency Wafa reported 1 hour ago that President Abbas said tonight that the Palestinian leadership is moving at all levels, which is part of its national responsibility to defend our people. Jerusalem is a red line, said President Abbas. It is the heart and soul of Palestine and its eternal capital. There will be no peace, security, or stability until it is liberated. So this is the official statement from the Palestinian Authority that was particularly silent. We can say that they were actually replaced on the ground basically by the Palestinian people themselves, who took to the streets and didn't listen to their leadership.
And this is why I think the scenes that we see in front of us, Romana, is particularly important, because this is happening in front of an Israeli checkpoint called the Beit El checkpoint in Ramallah. And this is really about a kilometer or so from the headquarters of the Palestinian Authority. We know similar scenes are now reported in Al-Biri, which is adjacent to Ramallah. So I think this is an attempt by Mahmoud Abbas to catch up. I think he realizes that he is in serious trouble. Initially, as you said, there was very little response. I mean, countries in South Africa and Pakistan and Italy responded before Mahmoud Abbas himself responded. And now he's trying to catch up to show that he is part of this movement. Of course, he's not. And none of these Palestinian millionaires of Ramallah who have benefited and enriched themselves at the expense of the Palestinian people, none of them are really being part of this movement. This is a spontaneous, genuine Palestinian movement that is grassroots movements, that is not factional, not ideological, not political. It's a movement, the people themselves rising to restore their honor and their dignity. That's what it's all about. And nobody cares if this man who's with his slingshot that you see in front of you, nobody cares whether he's a Hamas or Fatah. Nobody cares about the color of his kufiya. Nobody cares about his ideological affiliation. He's a Palestinian, and he is standing up in solidarity, communal solidarity with his people from Al-Quds, Jerusalem, to the Gaza Strip.
In fact, Ramzy, what you said in the beginning, this unity of the Palestinian people, which is actually going beyond any boundaries that were set by Israeli occupation, but also by those who, for example, negotiated for Oslo, and the political fragmentation and the territorial fragmentation. All these boundaries seem to be destroyed by this movement, which is really beyond everything. And something that I would like to remember to everybody, that there is a background that we cannot forget, and the background of everyday reality is going on. So when we speak about Gaza and the emergency in Gaza, we have to know that the healthcare system, healthcare crisis in Gaza is something that is ongoing, and the hospitals were already overwhelmed because of the COVID-19 situation. In the West Bank, now we have a crisis, but today a 16-year-old was shot in Tubas, and another man, we want to remember his name, Rashid Muhammad Abu Arreh, 16 years old, and another man, 26-year-old Hussein Tidi, was shot in a refugee camp near Hebron. So basically the reality on the ground is going on as usual, because we report about these things every day. Now there is more attention, but we report on these tragic news every day. And this is the ongoing reality that Palestinians are fighting back.
Absolutely. And also it's important to mention that yesterday settlers have killed a Palestinian man or Jewish extremists rather in the town of Al-Lud, have killed a Palestinian man in that city, and that's what really instigated the Palestinian protests, which were already building up anyway. We also want to confirm the news earlier that the Israeli army has reported that 500, more than 500 airstrikes have been carried out against Gaza. What we also see in front of us right now, these are protests, pro-Palestinian rally, another spontaneous rally like many other rallies in Istanbul, in New York, in Seattle, throughout the Arab world, and in other parts of the world. Of course, we reported on Kenya, Nairobi earlier today, Cape Town, and other parts of South Africa. This particular one is taking place in Beirut.
This is Amman. Oh, sorry,
This is Beirut, and yes, there was an earlier protest in Amman, Jordan. This is Beirut right now. Live coverage coming to you from Al Mayadeen, our colleagues in Al Mayadeen channel in Lebanon, reporting on thousands of people rushing to the streets in solidarity with their brethren in Palestine.
And there is a breaking news, Ramzy, regarding a talk that U.S. President Joe Biden has had with Netanyahu. So it says that it sounded optimistic. Biden told reporters at the White House in a press conference, "My expectation and hope is this will be closing down sooner than later, but Israel has a right to defend itself." So
right, and really back to the nuances, Romana, here is that he's not asking Israel, or he's not just the blatant holding of responsibility of Palestinians that we are used to. And really, I do not want to exaggerate the Biden, my position on Joe Biden, and I the man has a huge legacy, and I've reported on that and quoted, his statements on Israel, Palestine for many years. But I think because of the pressure that exists within the Democratic Party, because of new young voices within the Democratic Party, they are pressuring the Biden administration to articulate their language slightly different than usual. Like, for example, this breaking news that you see in front of you at the screen coming from the Al Mayadeen, says the White House, they say, we encourage a path that will bring peace, permanent peace back to the area, and where Jerusalem should be a city of coexistence. I mean, this is important in the sense that the US has already signed off Jerusalem as the eternal and undivided capital of the Jewish people. So when you kind of see this new language, they are trying to find some sort of balance here. But slowly there is a slight change here, which is kind of the recognition of Palestinian rights in Jerusalem. Again, no exaggerations required. The Biden administration did not change its position wholly and completely regarding this issue, but the American language is slightly more guarded than usual. Yes, Romana.
Absolutely. And we see that regarding this language that is changing, of course, there are brave statements, especially from, I think the bravest statements in this sense from a politician comes from UK former leader, Labour Party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, who today tweeted, if Israel wants the violence to stop, and he wants it has to stop Israeli siege on Gaza and Israeli occupation and the settlement activity in all throughout all occupied territories. So I think Jeremy Corbyn didn't use nuances. He was kind of brave and bold, and we know that he
Absolutely.
paid a price for that, but he's not, giving up on this.
Absolutely. And we are trying to report on as much of these kind of statements as possible. Romana, if you could go through our live blog in today and yesterday, and try to update us on some of the statements that are being said by celebrities, by politicians, by activists. I think it's really important that we also convey to our listeners and viewers here the message that this time it is different in terms of the attention the situation in Palestine is garnering in mainstream circles. And I think one of the reasons that this is happening is Netanyahu has done his country a major disfavor when he allied Israeli politics with that of right-wing chauvinistic populist governments around the world, such as Modi's of India, Bolsonaro in Brazil, and the Trump administration. So those years of realignment has helped awaken many people within the mainstream to the idea that they are indeed supporting a racist apartheid regime. And a lot of people are now kind of openly writing about it, voices and individuals that we've never heard from them in the past are now openly saying things that are, where they stand in complete and total solidarity with Palestine.
There were several football players who took a stance for Palestine. Football players in Chile and in Kuwait, they wore kufiyas and they wore Palestine T-shirts and during matches. Also in Italy, some, for example, a couple of players from Internazionale, they also supported and took a stance for Palestine. In our blog, we reported about Mohamed Salah, who yesterday tweeted, "I am calling on all the world leaders, including on the Prime Minister of the country that has been my home for the past 4 years." He's, let's remember that he's playing with Liverpool, so he is in the UK, to do everything in their power to make sure the violence and killing of innocent people stops immediately. Enough. But maybe the boldest celebrity was an American actor. He is very famous, and he is Mark Ruffalo. It is not the first time that Mark Ruffalo calls out Israel on its apartheid, and it's not the first time he doesn't fear to express his strong opinion. In this case, yesterday he tweeted, 1,500 Palestinians face expulsion in Jerusalem. 200 protesters have been injured. Of course, the numbers are, it was written yesterday. 9 children have been killed. Sanctions on South Africa helped free its black people. It's time for sanctions on Israel to free Palestinians. Join the call. So he's openly urging for sanctions on Israel with the hashtag Sheikh Jarrah and Save Sheikh Jarrah, which have become famous. And Ramzy, what do you think? What do you think of this social campaign? We are seeing that these two hashtags, Save Sheikh Jarrah and Free Palestine, are very well spread on social media, and they're trending. They have been trending for weeks now.
I'm just going to interrupt you, Romana, here for a second. We just heard back from our one of our 2 correspondents in the Gaza Strip, Palestine Chronicle correspondent Fawzi Mahmoud, with few more lines. The family of Sharafi, the house of the family of Sharafi in the Sheikh Zayed city in Gaza have been hit, and the entire family is now buried under the ruins of their own home. So a residential home in the city of Sheikh Zayed in Gaza have been struck just minutes ago by an Israeli warplane, and the family is now buried under the ruins. We will update you on this particular story as soon as we hear back or we hear any more details from our correspondent, Palestine Chronicle correspondent in the Gaza Strip, Fawzi Mahmoud. We hope for the best, although it's really hard to imagine a good scenario coming out of a piece of news like this, but this is what Gazans have been dealing with, not just in this war, but in previous wars as well. Israel targets residential neighborhoods because they are trying to put pressure on the resistance. They are trying to put pressures on Palestinians to accept any arrangement that Israel offers to them that does not guarantee the lifting of the siege and the end of the ethnic cleansing of Jerusalem, and of course the end of the systemic racism and apartheid in the West Bank. So they try to increase the number of casualties among Palestinian civilians in order for the Palestinians to rush into any ceasefire agreement, most likely brokered by Egypt, as is often the case, and just simply accept to return to the status quo. That's the idea. This is why Israel targets civilians. Another piece of news, another breaking news coming from our correspondent in Gaza, repeated strikes targeting an area around the interior ministry building and the Ministry of Education, located, both of them located north of Gaza city. Several strikes targeting the two major buildings. One is the headquarters of the Interior Ministry, and the other is the Ministry of Education in northern Gaza. More on this later. Romana?
Yes, Ramzy. So I'm looking at, so a group of 25 Democratic legislators, also in the United States, are now urging Secretary of State Antony Blinken to pressure Israel to stop the planned displacement of several Palestinian families in East Jerusalem. So we go back to Sheikh Jarrah here, to the root of this latest crisis. And let's remember that, the crisis in Sheikh Jarrah didn't start 2 weeks ago. This is something that dates back many years. According to Congresswoman Mary Newman, she spearheaded the letter, and she said the forced displacement of Palestinian families in Sheikh Jarrah is a blatant human rights violation. So this is the letter signed by 25 Democratic legislators.
And can we access some of the names of the people who signed this letter?
Yes, I'm trying to open the file so we can have a better idea and understanding of what's happening in the Congress, in the American Congress. Okay, so
I think this is a particularly interesting development because the number of congressmen and women who are raising their voices in protest of Israel's practices is now going beyond the usual list of the few courageous Congress women and men in Washington into the list seems to be constantly expanding, and now is even including people who have been or are seen to be centrists in American politics.
So aside from Mary Newman, who, as we said, spearheaded the letter, There is Curry Bush. We reported on her on the Palestine Chronicle because she is a nurse, a black woman, a member of the Black Lives Matter movement. She was openly supporting the BDS, and she defeated a Zionist who was there for so many years. There is Betty McCollum. We also know her name. She is
Romana, if you could just read the names quickly, because I have another piece of breaking news coming from Gaza.
Betty McCollum, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Cory Bush. I'm mentioning just the most well-known names, but also, for example, Debbie Dingle, Ayanna Presley, Veronica Escobar, Jackie Spire, and Ayanna Presley, and so on.
Oh, thank you for that, Romana. Another piece of breaking news coming to us from our correspondent in the Gaza Strip. Just one quick second here. Another piece of breaking news. I'm gonna take us back to Al Jazeera screen. The piece of news is coming from the Ministry of Interior in Gaza, saying that the Gaza's largest security building that's part of the Ministry of Interior has been completely destroyed and leveled to the ground, completely destroyed. This is the latest news dispatch coming to us from our correspondent reporting on the latest happening in Gaza. Another piece of news, another breaking piece of news is that large explosions heard in areas that are adjacent or in the western parts of Gaza City. Large explosions heard in neighborhoods in western Gaza City happening now. And now the screen that you see in front of you, clashes between Palestinian protesters and the Israeli army at the Beit El checkpoint in Ramallah is happening. That's on the top right screen. Gaza under constant strikes, top left screen. Then you also have clashes in Haifa, and there is this fire in Al-Lud. We do not know what is the source of fire and what is causing it. It could potentially be the gas reservoir that was set on fire yesterday. What we see in front of us right now is a truck that has also been set on fire. Also, you can see scenes from the Shifa hospital in Gaza just moments ago of a new number of Palestinian wounded men, women, and children are being brought to the Shifa hospital for treatment. And if you could just update our viewers, Romana, about the latest casualties from the Gaza Strip.
Yes, Ramzy, unfortunately, we said 65. The death toll reaches 65, including 16 children and 5 women. At least 365 people have been wounded, including 86 children. It's a huge number, Ramzy. 1/3 of the wounded people are children and 39 women. This means that, of course, they are targeting residential areas. They're not targeting, as they keep claiming, military targets, because there are children, so many children injured, and so many children, unfortunately, they were killed by the Israeli airstrike. So it's clear that they are bombing residential areas and homes, private.
Of course, you will not have this kind of percentage of casualties that include this number of children and women unless, of course, you are bombing people's homes. Of course, just a quick reminder to our readers, you can go to the Palestine Chronicle live blog. All you need to do is go to PalestineChronicle.com, and you will see our live blog. It's just the main story in the middle of your screen. And we have the latest updates happening in Gaza coming from our correspondent and from other news agencies. And also, you can subscribe to our Twitter channel at Palestine Chron, that is at Palestine CHRON. Of course, please do follow us on Facebook. There's been a great deal of censorship as of late. Videos that we post that suddenly disappear, images that we post that disappear, comments by our readers that disappear. So your support is really essential to help us overcome this persistent censorship that is being practiced by those who are allowing themselves to govern free speech regarding Palestine, of course, and only Palestine, as Palestine remains the exception.
And Ramzy, I would also like to invite people to like our Instagram page. We are trying to, to update our Instagram feed too with stories and videos that we receive. And also, we just opened actually a Telegram channel. So the people who already are familiar with Telegram can follow us. I'm gonna, of course, in the comment section, I'm gonna update the comment section with the link for our Telegram channel. They can be updated. We are gonna send the live blog and our videos.
Absolutely. This is Romana. This is the video I was referring to earlier of Muna al-Kurd being kicked out of the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Now, Muna al-Kurd, we actually wrote an article, an editorial about Muna al-Kurd called Muna is Palestine, Yaqub is Israel, and you will find it on the Palestine Chronicle. If you could kindly share it with our readers in the comment section, Romana, that would be great. Now, this is Muna, who's a video standing up to an Israeli settler who stole her home, saying, "You need to get out of my home, Yaqub." And Yaqub responding by saying, "If I don't steal your home, someone else will." And this is today of Muna, not Yaqub, Muna being kicked out of her beloved Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Let's watch. By Chile, that's my home. The girl yells at the soldiers in Arabic, but if in Hebrew rather, but of course they could care less, regardless of what language Palestinians use to reclaim their homes. It makes no difference. We have a kind of a bittersweet piece of news coming to us from our correspondent in Gaza. The house that we reported on earlier on, that it has been demolished and or it was hit in an Israeli strike, and where the people inside that home were buried under the ruins, um, we can say that a woman, a mother and her daughter have been pulled out by Palestinians from under the wreckage of their home, which is in the city of Sheikh Zayed, northern Gaza, and they are in good condition. We do not know if any other members of the family remain under the wreckage, but we can confirm through our correspondent who is near the scene that a mother and her daughter have been pulled out from underneath the wreckage, and they are in good condition. Romana?
Yes, Ramzy, we are trying to update our feed. Of course, these images, these hospitals, we know today when I spoke to our correspondent from Gaza, she was telling us, Wafa Al-Udaini, she told me that she spoke to some doctors too, and it's really complicated because soon they will not have medicine and equipment. Also, because let's remember that all the crossings are closed. So Gaza is in a very, very tough spot here. They're gonna start selecting who to treat and who to leave behind, because they do not have enough beds, they do not have enough equipment. So the situation in Gaza is really tough. And honestly, when you see these scenes and you report the whole day from the news desk about these scenes, and then you read statements from politicians speaking about, solidarity, a one-sided solidarity. This is really beyond any imagination, because it's surreal that somebody can express its solidarity and completely ignore the plight of the Palestinian people, not only in the ordinary day, but even when Israel is bombing repeatedly Gaza non-stop or around the clock. So it's really disturbing, and
of course, I was sorting through some Israeli media, and I kind of ran into Haaretz. Not a big fan really, and I just want to make a point here, is that there's so much emphasis. I don't know how this whole thing started, that somehow Haaretz is a voice for Palestinians or a progressive Israeli news organizations, and I go there, and what they currently have is just the news of an Israeli being killed, images of Israeli homes, or rather Palestinian rockets falling on Israel, and very little regard really for Palestinians and their lives and their properties and their homes and their freedom and so forth. I think it's really important for our viewers, our listeners, to really understand that in order for them to develop a proper understanding of what's happening in Palestine, they have to consult with Palestinian sources like the Palestine Chronicle that you see in front of you right now. This is where you are going to get the truth on Palestine. This is where you are going to get the unhindered facts. This is where you are going to find news that reflect the views of the Palestinian people and the genuine voices of Palestinian people and Palestinian intellectuals. Of course, you can go to electronicintifada.net and other Palestinian sources, but I think really a shout out to all of the people who are providing good coverage, either Palestinians and others who are providing good coverage regarding this issue. You do not need Israeli sources to yet convey more propaganda and more lies about what's happening in Israel and try. Yes, Romana.
Breaking news from our correspondent Wafa in Gaza. Palestinian civil defense pulls a woman and a child alive from the rubble of a house that was bombed by the occupation in the northern Gaza Strip. I think, of course, she is referring to the house that you mentioned before.
That's right. That our other correspondent has mentioned earlier, and that's just a rare moment of on the last day of the holy month of Ramadan for Muslims, a rare moment of hope and good news coming during these really, really difficult times. Al Jazeera here is reporting that the Israeli shekel is losing much of its value for the second day straight. We know that yesterday the Ben Gurion airport was shut down in a rare occurrence, and flights were diverted that were coming to Israel were diverted to Cyprus and Greece as a result. I think what is really happening here, Romana, is that Israel is for the first time in a long, long time is realizing that there is a price to be paid. That this is not business as usual. You can't just go to Gaza and to other parts of the West Bank, steal whatever land you wish, rob whatever orchards that you want to rob, and ethnically cleanse people with no accountability, or go to Gaza and kill entire families and demolish their homes and return to Israel victorious and present yourself as the savior of Israel and the Jewish people. That this time around, the degree of accountability has increased so significantly to the point that we are seeing that the Israeli economy is now taking a hit. 3.5 million Israelis were in shelters yesterday. And I can imagine that number might have even increased today. This is like about half, if not even more, of the Israeli population that is now understanding for the first time in quite some times what Palestinians have to go through. Just a small glimpse of what Palestinians have to go through. We see now the violence, and another thing that's happening also is that the degree of violence is not only reaching Palestinians in Gaza, where Palestinians are isolated and completely entrapped by Israeli bombs and rockets, but rather the degree of violence and clashes and the intensity of these clashes are now spreading across the entire country, and not just in the West Bank, not just in East Jerusalem, but in Israeli cities as well. There is an intifada, there is a Palestinian uprising of the native indigenous Palestinians in Israel, rising for their own grievances, for their own causes as well, because they are victims of racism. They are victims of apartheid. They are treated as second, third, and fourth class citizens in that country. And now they are rising in solidarity with Gaza and with Jerusalem. This is truly unprecedented, truly unprecedented. I think we are here at the cusp of a whole new chapter in this so-called Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's not a conflict, we know that. But there's a whole new chapter is being written here. And I can imagine the degree of confusion that is being felt by the Israeli leaders, who are so used to the notion of creating, instigating, and managing conflicts, and stopping exactly when they feel that their political objectives have been met. Suddenly they are dealing in a situation here where they are no longer able to manage the conflicts that they have themselves instigated. And this is absolutely a huge development. And it has to be recorded, it has to be discussed. Romana, do you have any updates?
No, there are no updates. The numbers are, of course, the bombing continue in Gaza.
Actually, there is an update, and let me bring the screen of the, sorry to interrupt you, Romana, but this is coming fresh from Al Mayadeen. If I can figure out my technical problems here. Coming to us from Al Mayadeen. Al-Qassam brigades send rockets towards Tel Aviv in response to the continued Israeli targeting the continued Israeli targeting of all of Palestinian residential areas and residential towers. Another piece of news also reporting, conveying the message that is being sent out through Israeli media, demanding that a state of emergency is declared in all of Israel. Israeli media demands that a state of emergency is declared in all of Israel. I can't remember the last time I lived in Palestine. I lived in a refugee camp in the Gaza Strip until I was in my early 20s. I lived in 94. I lived during the Gulf War when rockets were fell on Israel coming from Iraq because of the Israeli role in the Iraq War. I have not seen anything like this. I do not, and I speak here not as a person who have lived that experience, but also as someone who has written books about Palestinian history and the history of the Israeli occupation. I do not recall a time that can be compared to this one, where a state of emergency is being demanded to be declared in all of Israel. If there's anything that is true, is that Israel always tries in its conflicts to, number one, take the conflict to the Palestinians and keep its own cities immune, so that Palestinians may be collecting the bodies of their dead and their wounded from under the wreckage of the Gaza, destroyed Gaza buildings. But Tel Aviv is, kind of carrying on with its busy city life and clubs and parties and restaurants and nightlife and all of this, so that they do not put too much pressure on their own citizens and make them feel that we are protecting you, you are safe, everything is under control. But this is no longer the case. Now, all Israelis are now feeling the impact of the reckless policies of their government, feeling the impact of their occupation. It's no longer something that only Palestinians are sensing and feeling and watching and dealing with, of course, still at completely two different capacities. I mean, what Palestinians are going through is entirely different and far more extreme than what Israelis are going through. But the fact that you have millions of Israelis in shelters as we speak, and you have Israeli cities such as Tel Aviv, Al-Ramle, Al-Lud, and other places, and Ashkelon, that are being targeted either by Palestinian resistance or by Palestinian protests. And as a result, you have this massive undertaken by extremist Jewish settlers and extremist Zionists within Israel itself that are lashing out, attacking, wounding, and killing Palestinians who are also citizens of Israel, has created a situation that is unprecedented in its degree of intensity, in the degree of violence, and in how widespread it is, like never before, really. Currently, there are clashes in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in Jerusalem, and of course, clashes continue in Ramallah, in Beiri, in Lid, in Al-Fahim, in Haifa, and in other parts of the occupied territories and today's Israel.
And Ramzy, unfortunately, there is an update, and the numbers changed. 67 Palestinian dead, including 16 children and 6 women, 388 wounded, and 115 of them are children.
If you could read the numbers to us again, but a little slower, Romana.
67 Palestinian dead, including 16 children and 6 women, 388 wounded, 115 of them are children, unfortunately.
And at the Palestine Chronicle, we try our very best to provide the names of those who are killed, just so that Palestinians do not go down as a mere statistic. So we will try to provide the full list of those who are killed, and you will find it on our live blog as soon as possible. A piece of breaking news coming from Al Mayadeen, the Lebanese TV channel in Lebanon, conveying from Israeli media sources that a Palestinian has been stabbed in a market in Jerusalem, and he is currently in a critical condition. A Palestinian has been stabbed, most likely by Jewish extremists, as is often the case, in a market in Jerusalem, and he is currently in critical condition. The footage you see in front of you right now is footage coming from the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. You can see the heavy Israeli security, army, and police presence, and the footage comes to you live through Al Mayadeen channel in Lebanon. So I think what is happening here is that the Israeli army perhaps is trying to take advantage of the situation by before I continue, we go to Gaza, and we see what appears to be Israeli rockets or Israeli missiles falling on the Gaza Strip. But anyway, back to Sheikh Jarrah. What could possibly be happening is that perhaps the Israeli army is going to try to speed up the process of ethnic cleansing in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood to create new facts on the ground, so that Israel does not find itself under any kind of pressure to reach some sort of a compromise or to agree to leave the Palestinian families that have lived in Sheikh Jarrah for decades, to leave them back in their homes. Now, I think there's something really important about what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah, a context that is quite missing. And we have been writing about this, Romana, for the Palestine Chronicle and other newspapers as of late. And that is, what is the legal basis that allows Israel to tell, or the Israeli Supreme Court to tell people living in their own homes that this home doesn't belong to you anymore and you need to leave? Now, I know some of us might say, well, this is Israel. That's what Israel what Israel does. It has done so since the very beginning. The entirety of Israel is itself built on ethnically cleansed Palestinian homes. So the question is moot. But it's a little bit more interesting than this. In 1970, there was a law that passed by the Israeli government that allows Jews to claim Palestinian properties, Palestinian private properties that they say used to be owned by Jews at one point in the past. And that's what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah. These homes that belong to Palestinians, a group of Jewish individuals who are, of course, financed and supported by various Jewish organizations because they want to build a new settlement there, they have been suing Palestinians to kick them out of their homes based on this law from 1970. And you will find that our latest editorial in the Palestine Chronicle provides that historical context to why this is happening in Sheikh Jarrah right now. So you have the law of 1970. You also have the Absentee Laws, which passed in 1950. These are a law that passed to allow Israel to claim properties of Palestinian homes and land where their owners are absent. But where are the owners? Well, the owners are my parents and my grandparents and the parents and grandparents of millions of Palestinians who have been evicted, kicked out, and ethnically cleansed from their homes in Palestine in 1947, 48. So the events, the flow of events goes something like this. Israeli militias and Zionist groups ethnically cleanse Palestinians out of their homes, build the state of Israel, and then declare, well, Palestinians are absent, they are not there. Well, why are they absent? Because they have been evicted and they have been ethnically cleansed and they have been massacred and they have been forced to flee from their homes, and then they were not allowed to exercise their right of return, which is enshrined under international law. And then in 1950, a year or two later, Israel came up with the absentee law that allows it to claim Palestinian properties of those people who are supposedly absent. Now, that law is also claimed or is also used by Israeli courts in the case of Jerusalem. So you have the law of 1970, the absentee law, and also the special plan that Israel created. I think it was called Jerusalem 2000, if I remember correctly, Romana, which basically decided we're not happy with the demographics of Jerusalem. The Palestinians are still more than the Jews, and all the attempts at ethnically cleansing Palestinians and emptying their neighborhoods, like the one that you see in front of you on the screen right now, this of Sheikh Jarrah, it's still not allowing us to claim decisive and clear Jewish majority in occupied East Jerusalem. So what did they do? They decided to expand the boundaries of the city of Jerusalem. They expanded the boundaries, and by doing so, they kept Palestinian neighborhoods and small towns and villages out of the boundaries of Jerusalem. They included Jewish neighborhoods into the new boundaries of Jerusalem, and they systematically began pushing Palestinians out of their neighborhoods, namely Salwan and Sheikh Jarrah, ethnically cleansing hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinians and claiming their properties to have belonged to Jewish owners at one point in the past. So when we think of Sheikh Jarrah, we have to think of this context. This is not about Sheikh Jarrah alone. This is about something that is much bigger. It's about all of Jerusalem. In fact, it's about all of Palestine. It's the story of Palestine that keeps repeating itself over and over again. And this is why we wrote an article recently called The Nakba of Sheikh Jarrah, where we tried to connect the Nakba, the catastrophic ethnic cleansing of Palestine in 1947-48, with what is happening right now. This is history. This is the ongoing Nakba, the ongoing ethnic cleansing of Palestine. The Nakba is not an event that has taken place sometime in the past and ceased on happening. The Nakba is an event that was instigated and started at one point in the past, but continues to happen until this very moment. So what is happening right now is this, what we call in Arabic, al-Nakba al-Mustamirra, the ongoing Nakba of Palestine. But the Palestinian people are not going anywhere. They are fighting back. They are insisting on their rights to do so. They are understanding that real accountability can only happen through the resistance. And by saying resistance, I'm not talking about rockets. I'm not talking about explosions and guns. I'm talking about the very idea of resistance, the notion of cultural resistance that makes people realize that under any circumstance or under no circumstance will I ever give up, will I ever surrender my rights. That's the resistance I'm talking about. Because if it's about guns and bullets, well, look at the Palestinian Authority and their massive security apparatus, or so-called security apparatus in Ramallah and in the West Bank, that is coordinating their security movement with Israel, with the very Israeli occupation, and using that security apparatus to suppress Palestinian resistance in the West Bank. If it's about guns and bullets, then Mahmoud Abbas stands for popular resistance. or rather stands for resistance, but he doesn't. We know that. We know he doesn't. Resistance is what you see in front of you. What's happening in Al-Quds, in Sheikh Jarrah, in Al-Lud, in Nablus, in Ramallah, in Gaza. This is the real resistance of the Palestinian people. And by the way, this kind of resistance cannot be sustained if it doesn't have critical mass support of the Palestinian people. Sometimes I really find it shocking sometimes that people go out there and start condemning this form of resistance and hailing this other form of resistance. It doesn't work this way. There is no picking and choosing. This is the choice of the Palestinian people. And if the Palestinian people, if the majority of Palestinians do not want to practice certain form of resistance, they would have immediately abandoned this kind of resistance a long time ago. So the resistance that you see in front of you happening throughout Palestine, it is a resistance that has already won the support of all Palestinians, or rather of majority of Palestinians. So there is a critical mass support that is already existing as far as the methods of resistance used by Palestinians in various parts of Palestine. And we saw that in the chants of the people of Jerusalem when they called on Gaza to come to their aid, and the chants of Gazans telling the people of Jerusalem that you will always find in us a strong supporter, a brother, a sister, and a backer. And this is the reality. This is the true unity of Palestine and the Palestinian people. It's not the unity of factions. It's not about some agreement signed in Cairo or Istanbul. What you see in front of you is that of unity, the unity of purpose, wahdat al-masir, as we say in Arabic, the unity of purpose. And that unity of purpose can only be expressed through grassroots resistance, popular resistance, and popular support for the resistance that exists in Palestine at the moment.
Well, Ramzy, one last thing that I would like to dedicate like a thought to Palestinian children, because we know that the bombings never stopped. The noise is so loud. Of course, the noise of explosion all over Gaza. And also talking to our correspondent, I always ask her, she has 3 beautiful children. I always ask her, how are your children? How are they coping? How are you coping with them, coming and wanting to hug you? And she told me that they are pretending that there are fireworks in order, to psychologically deal with the trauma. Of course, the children knows they're not fireworks, but they are, playing along with this thing just to keep their mind strong. And I think this is how Palestinian resistance is formed, in a sense, since when they are children, they need to cope with things that, they are not, we can't even imagine in the West what it means. And I think that's why Palestinian people are so strong. Now this word now is really trending, resilience, especially with COVID-19. Palestinians have the word sumud, which is the predecessor of resilience, and maybe has even more nuances and implications than the word resilience. And I think Palestinian children can give a lesson to the world in this moment and everywhere. We saw scenes of this courage from Palestinian children. And I think it is important to talk about these things because Palestinians are constantly dehumanized by Western media. What you said before, we want to say the names of people who are died, because Palestinians are not numbers, they're not statistics, they are not something that is on newspapers or on websites. They are not anonymous figures behind rockets who are making other people crying. They are human beings. They are asking for their basic human rights. There are children, there are families. We just reported about a family, a woman and a child who were saved from the robbers of their own home. So let's not lose the human touch here when we report, when we follow news from Palestine.
Absolutely. Just another piece of breaking news. There is a new Israeli bombing campaign that is happening in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. We don't know what city in particular it's targeting, but news media Al Mayadeen that we are watching right now reports that an Israeli airstrike is taking place in the southern Gaza Strip at the moment. Also the images, the horrible images that we had no other option but to show you earlier of the Palestinian man who was being attacked and brutally beaten by Jewish extremists, is in a critical condition and is fighting for his life at the moment. Another piece of news also coming from Al Mayadeen, Joe Biden sent a letter to Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, to put pressure on the Palestinian resistance in Gaza to cease its rocket attacks or retaliation that have targeted the city of Tel Aviv. Another piece of news also, that, as you can tell, that this is just an ongoing story with numerous angles and numerous actors. Another piece of news is that the clashes in the city of Lud that saw a large number of Jewish extremists attacking Palestinian neighborhoods were particularly targeting the Great Mosque, Al-Jami' Al-Kabir, the Great Mosque of Al-Lud, which is a historic mosque in that city. Of course, Palestinians, Muslims and Christians have confronted these settlers and tried to push them, or these extremists, and tried to push them back and to protect the mosque. It seems that the extremists were trying to set the mosque ablaze, to set it on fire, and possibly they have failed in doing so. We haven't heard any more updates regarding that story, but we know that their intention was to actually burn down that mosque. Breaking news, the sirens have been sounded in the cities of Nahariya, Akka, and Haifa in northern Palestine, today's Israel. And this is particularly interesting because it seems that the outreach of the Palestinian rockets have now extended to entirely new areas, reaching the northern cities of Nahariya and Akka and Haifa, to be added to Ashkelon and Tel Aviv earlier. Now, of course, the challenge, Romana, is this. The Palestinians are now saying that we are going all out in resisting what Israel is doing, not just in Jerusalem, but everywhere else. And things cannot cease. Things cannot go back to a terrible status quo unless there is real pressure on Israel to change its ways. Now, of course, Israel wants, Netanyahu is desperate to return to the status quo. He did not anticipate. There is absolutely no way that Netanyahu had anticipated this kind of Palestinian response. So he is desperate to return to the status quo. The question is, he wants to go to the status quo, but with appearing to be a protector of Israel and the guardian of the Jewish people everywhere, and he wants to utilize this in his upcoming military, rather political battle in the Knesset, and possibly a fifth elections in Israel that could be held in coming months. He is trying to escape this with the least amount of damage to his reputation, to his leadership, and to his chances of his political chances of being re-elected again, or to maintain his position at the helm. The resistance is increasing that political price on Netanyahu so significantly, especially that you see this massive solidarity coming from all Palestinian communities all across occupied Palestine, where they are going to make it impossible for Netanyahu to escape unscathed from all of this, and to claim the role of the triumphant Israeli leader who managed to suppress the so-called Palestinian terrorists. So what the Palestinians are trying to send to Netanyahu is a message that the rules of the game have changed. The rules of the game have changed. And the rules of the game are not the rules that are only set by Israel. The rules are also now equally being set by the Palestinians themselves. Another piece of news coming from Israeli media as well, the rabbi of Safad, has issued a religious decree calling for the death of Arabs. The rabbi of Safad has issued a decree calling for the death of Arabs. Now, the rabbi of Safad, if anyone of you is familiar with the sinister character, he had such terrible fatwas in the past, or Jewish fatwas, if you will, and is notorious for exploiting this kind of violence in order for him to increase the power and influence of his particular brand of extremist interpretation of the Bible. And now he has taken advantage of this situation by issuing such a horrific religious decree calling for the death of Arabs. And considering the fact that the death of Arabs is already happening right now as we speak, and considering how much influence the rabbi of Safad wields amongst his supporters, you can only imagine the degree of violence that his decree is going to garner among his supporters. Romana.
Even saying a religious decree and associating it to such a hatred, it seems a paradox somehow. On the other side of the barricade, we have the Red Cross officials who are urging for exercising restraint and reaching a de-escalation, because of course the head of the International Committee of the Red Cross subdelegation in Gaza said that we strongly ask to all the parties to exercise restraint and reach a de-escalation. I think that the situation, of course, on the ground is really complicated. And Ramzy, what you just said, the rabbi saying these things, and the Palestinian men in critical conditions, we saw the video, we saw the brutality, we saw that he was beaten while he was already on the ground, on the floor, unconscious. Because we can say that the violence in this in Israeli society is not something random, it's not something new, and it's something which is endemic in the system of Israeli society in its own, in general. And you wrote about it recently, about these Jewish settlers' violence not being random, but being a component, an integral component of Israeli society, especially, how it is, the trend is that this violence is gonna increase.
And that was to be expected, of course, Romana, as you know, that those who have affiliated with the left, even though Israel has a very special definition of its left, those affiliated with the left and have shrunk so dramatically in recent years that the majority of Israelis really kind of rotates somewhere around the right-wing mentality. So it was only a matter of time before this kind of extreme degrees of violence take place. The fact that, for example, the gangs of Jewish extremists that are roaming the streets of Arab neighborhoods inside Israel, I mean, they are very well organized. They are affiliated with two major gangs. One is called La Familia, and the other is called La Hava. And these two gangs, very well organized, very politicized. They have very strong relationship with various ultra-nationalist Knesset members. They get their directions, their directives coming from these Knesset members. They are the ones who are doing so much of this damage, of course, under the watchful eye of the Israeli police and security. So it reminds you of the early gangs that were affiliated with Zionism before they were all merged into the Israeli, what they call the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF today. Prior to that, they refer to them as the Zionist gangs or Zionist militias. And indeed, they were gangs. And it seems that Israel is disintegrating once more back to its origins, where now they are dividing themselves in the form of gangs. And you will see after all of this, these gangs are going to be getting so many new recruits, and most likely there will be new gangs that are going to be formulated, and their job is going to now to terrorize and possibly try to ethnically cleanse the Arab population of Israel itself. Another piece of breaking news: 13 wounded Palestinians as a result of Israeli strike. The strike that we have reported about earlier, Romana, 13 Palestinians were wounded in an Israeli strike targeting homes in the northern Gaza Strip. This comes from Al Jazeera Live, which we are watching right now. Now, yes, go ahead.
Ramzy, a statement from Human Rights Watch, which recently signed and filed a report on Israel's apartheid, that we talked about it because it's really important. Human Rights Watch is maybe one of the most mainstream among the human rights groups, and it's the largest human rights group based in the United States. They said that the use of the force, there was an abuse of force by Israel, and Israel's use of force against Palestinians continues as it is never held to account. So Human Rights Watch is calling for somebody to hold Israel accountable, which is something, Ramzy, that we have been doing. Palestinians have been doing that, have been asking that for a long time.
Of course. And we have been making the argument that accountability, you can't wait on Israeli society to change from within. This is what we have been urged by many people in the past, that it's all about changing Israeli society from within. Well, we have waited for over 70 years for that change to take place, and yet nothing has occurred. Accountability has to happen through two types of pressure: one coming from the Palestinian people themselves through their unity around their resistance and their popular resistance, and the other form of pressure of international solidarity movement around the world, civil society organizations and individuals around the world, putting pressure on their governments, on their media, and to hold Israel accountable, to isolate Israeli apartheid, to shame Israel for its apartheid, until this travesty, this ongoing genocidal war against the Palestinian people come to an end, until international law is respected. The story continues, and we are going to continue to cover it for you We are going to be turning off here from our live coverage at Palestine Chronicle TV. We will try to be back as soon as possible. In the meantime, please make sure that you visit our live blog. We do our very best to keep you updated through the live blog. All you need to do, very simple, just go here, PalestineChronicle.com. You will find the latest updates, the latest commentaries, Palestine Chronicle TV episodes, discussions, even podcasts. We are a small organization, but we do make a tremendous difference. And I really applaud everybody involved with the Palestine Chronicle. You are the true guardians of the truth and the true discourse on Palestine and the Palestinian people. With very little resources, they are making a humongous difference in this coverage. And it's updated every single day. And just if just when you think that they have reached their maximum capacity of work, then they launch the Palestine Chronicle French, Chronique Palestine, which does the exact same thing in the French language. And there is discussions about launching an Italian version of the Palestine Chronicle. You're wondering, how do they do this? How with the very little resources you have as a non-for-profit organization with very, very limited resources, how can you do this? And I would say really faith in the truth, faith in the people, faith in the mission itself. Make sure that you go to our live blog. That is going to be your main source of information. It's updated, very professional looking, latest videos, images, and newslines coming from our correspondents in Gaza. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I know it's very late your time. In Italy, it's after midnight. It's 1 a.m. your time in Italy, Romana. I really appreciate you staying with us this late. To our Muslim viewers, we wish you as happy holidays as one can wish under these circumstances. Congratulations at the end of the holy month of Ramadan. Eid Mubarak to all of you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for interacting. Thank you for sharing our content, for your comments, for your solidarity. And we will see you again here very soon. Thank you.